Glenn Rhee's journey continues in part 2 of our in-depth character spotlight on The Walking Dead. What's up guys, Roman from RNS Entertainment here, and welcome to another episode of Comic History, the weekly series where we go over the iconic storylines and origins in the world of comics. This week we're continuing on with our in-depth Walking Dead character spotlight on Glenn Rhee. On part 1 we covered Glenn's run through the first 25 issues of the series, so make sure to check that out as well, along with our episodes on Abraham, Tyrese, and Axel. Part 1 wrapped up with Glenn and Rick donning their newly acquired riot suits on a trip to the prison parking lot to siphon gas and attempt to use the generator to have at least sporadic power within their new home. The last page saw our two heroes in awe at a helicopter passing by, giving them renewed hope at the possibility of other survivors. Glenn and Rick quickly start talking about the helicopter, noting that it doesn't appear to be military, before Rick excitedly says that they should burn one of the cars in the lot to get their attention, immediately being attacked by a zombie that wandered over while Glenn and Rick were distracted. They kill the zombie, and Glenn notes how effective the riot suits are before they notice the helicopter trailing black smoke while descending, and realize that they aren't landing, they're crashing. Rick runs back to the prison gates to tell the other survivors about the helicopter, while Glenn notes the direction of the crash and prepares one of the cars in the lot for travel so that they can find out where these people came from and help them if necessary. At the gates, Michonne, who is at this point still a new addition to the group, offers to go with them, and together her, Glenn, and Rick take a car towards the helicopter wreckage. On the way, Rick asks Glenn how he started the car, and Glenn says that he wasn't just a pizza delivery boy before the outbreak. He actually stole cars whenever he had financial troubles, having learned how to do it in high school to fuck with other dudes, and then eventually started stealing cars for real when he got low on rent or couldn't get by. Rick says that it was a different time, and hell, he had stolen police cars to get down to Atlanta right when he woke up from his coma, and Michonne laughs at the notion that she's driving around with a couple of criminals. Eventually, the road curves off from the direction of the smoke from the helicopter, forcing them off-road, with Glenn lamenting that he chose the car over the SUV. The car gets stuck in the mud, causing the group to make the rest of the journey there and back on foot. After walking through the forest for a time, Glenn notices the smoke leading to the crashed helicopter, which landed in a muddy creek bed. Before he steps into the mud to look for survivors, Glenn is pulled back as they notice multiple sets of footprints going to and away from the helicopter, indicating that some other group had gotten to the wreckage first. With nighttime rapidly setting in, Rick and Michonne accidentally leave Glenn at the helicopter with him still talking, and when Glenn catches up, he points out that being out there in the dark is not a good idea. Reasoning that whatever group had found the helicopter had to be closer than the prison, Rick decides that they should press on and find these people instead of returning to the prison that night. Following the tracks to a road, Glenn sees a sign with the closest town, Woodbury, only a mile away, and they decide that it's their best bet of finding this new group. When they reach their destination, they're greeted by a sign that reads "Welcome to Woodbury," though the town itself seems dead and empty. When they decide to turn back and try to make it back to the prison, the area is suddenly flooded with spotlights by vehicles ringing a walled-off section of the town, revealing a heavily defended perimeter that fires at the zombies that had followed the group on their way in, with a voice shouting out for them to duck to avoid getting shot by accident. Glenn, Rick, and Michonne are then grabbed and relieved of their weapons by a man named Martinez, who welcomes them to Woodbury and says he's taking them to the man in charge, but doesn't get the chance as Woodbury's leader walks up, flanked by two guards with a big smile on his face, being introduced only as the Governor. The Governor leads them through the streets, telling them about how he took a chance on putting this community together, grabbing power for himself for the greater good, while criticizing the government for their methods handling things when the outbreak happened, saying that the National Guard had abandoned a station nearby that had supplied them with weaponry including sniper rifles, night vision goggles, etc. The Governor leads them to a well-lit stadium that used to be used for dirt track racing, powered by generators and full of people. The Governor tells them that there's a fight tonight, revealing that he had organized a Coliseum-style gladiator bout for entertainment, having regular fights where two combatants square off surrounded by chained-up zombies to ramp up the tension, though the Governor says the zombies are more docile than normal because they had started feeding them. When Rick asks what they feed them, the Governor closes the door of the room he led them into and says, "Well, stranger, we're feeding them strangers." Glenn backs against the wall as they realize how much danger they're in, and when he asks what someone as well off as the Governor would want from them, the Governor says everything. Their food, their weapons, tools, ammo, medicine, anything and everything they have. When Rick refuses to give up information, the Governor has him held down and Glenn and Michonne guarded by his other henchmen, and Glenn watches in horror as the Governor slices Rick's hand off in an attempt to horrify the others into giving up the information on their group. Michonne dives on him and bites his ear off before his henchman is able to pull her off, and tears stream down Glenn's face when the Governor talks about how he's going to torture her. Glenn is placed in a locked warehouse while Michonne is being tortured and raped by the governor, and Rick's severed hand is being tended to, curling into a ball traumatized until one of the governor's men swings open the door and tells him he's getting a new room. Glenn refuses to move of his own accord, and the man grabs Glenn by the arm and literally drags him down the hall to the room beside Michonne's. The governor approaches and his man tells him that Glenn's riot armor doesn't have police markings, meaning it might be from a prison. Smiling, the governor tells Glenn that he sees how traumatic Rick's hand getting chopped off was for him, but that he really likes to stack the deck in his favor when it comes to interrogations, punching him in the face and telling him to listen. When Glenn asks him why he's doing this, the governor says the same reason anyone does anything, to get something he wanted. He tells Glenn to listen carefully as he goes to the next room and proceeds to brutally torture, beat, and rape Michonne, who he had already raped and beaten into a pulp from the first time, as Glenn is forced to listen, with his reactions turning to shock, then tears of horror, then a complete breakdown as he hears the brutality of the assault. Later, Glenn is freed by the governor's most trusted man, Martinez, who takes him to free Rick as well and says that he didn't know how far the governor would go and that he would help them, Michonne, and Woodbury's 2 doctors escape. Though Michonne turns back at the walls to get revenge on the governor, and Doc Stevens is killed by a zombie right outside of town. After spending the rest of the night in the wreckage of the helicopter, Glenn and the group reconnect with Michonne, who had walked all night after torturing the governor and escaping Woodbury once again. After finding themselves surrounded by zombies in the woods, they manage to fight their way through to their car, and after pushing it out of the mud, Glenn drives them back to the prison. When they arrive, Glenn is in shock, and tears stream down Rick's eyes as they find their prison overrun with hundreds on hundreds of zombies, the gates to all 3 fences wide open with Dale's RV halfway through the exit, and zombies having filled up every visible area. Glenn yells out for Maggie and gets back into the car, flooring it straight through the zombies at the gate, with Rick and the others chasing after him. Glenn repeatedly screams out for Maggie, losing control of the car and slamming directly into one of the prison walls. Alice, the other Woodbury resident that came with them, pulls Glenn out of the car while Martinez, Rick, and Michonne desperately fight off the surrounding zombies. When suddenly the doors to the RV swing open with Andrea and Dale joining the group, letting Rick know that the other survivors had tried to make it inside the prison when they were overrun. Glenn regains consciousness and makes it inside with the group, finally being reunited with Maggie after almost 2 weeks of hell. The next 4 days are spent with the survivors clearing out the overrun sections of the prison, killing all of the zombies, and then burning the bodies in a large pile. Glenn spends time with Maggie and can't keep the smile off his face, with her pouncing on him to have sex before he smells the smoke from the body pile outside. He runs outside with no explanation to Maggie and stops Tyrese and Axel, asking them not to burn any of the female zombies, to which they give him a weird look. Ty and Axel keep working while Glenn checks the female bodies, excitedly pulling off a wedding ring from one of them, intending to use it to propose to Maggie. He goes straight to Herschel and shows him the ring, with Herschel pulling him in for a big hug and telling Glenn that he has his blessing, and only to keep Maggie safe and try not to get her pregnant until things were safer in the world. He agrees and goes to Maggie, and when he proposes, she tells him that she needs to think about it. And then she laughs at how ridiculous his face looks, saying that she's only kidding and that of course she'll marry him. Glenn plans on asking Herschel to officiate as he's the most religious of their group and that he wants to spend whatever time they have left as husband and wife. They have their marriage ceremony in the prison cafeteria with the entire group gathered. Herschel reads from the Bible and Glenn and Maggie say their vows, being pronounced husband and wife and kissing each other to make it official. They return to their cell and Maggie laughs about how her dress was a prison jumpsuit, and after they both take a second to note that they're now husband and wife, Maggie takes off her jumpsuit and pounces on Glenn to have more sex. Glenn and Maggie then become part of an expedition including Michonne, Andrea, Tyrese, and Axel to go find and raid the National Guard station that had been supplying Woodbury with their weaponry. And as they leave, Glenn says he can't believe he's doing this again. Sometime later, Axel decides to pee right next to the RV, and Glenn asks if he could do that further away, joking when Axel notices he peed on a sign pointing them in the right direction. The group finds the guard station and loads up a military convoy vehicle with all of the remaining guns and ammunition they could find. Knowing that Woodbury is getting all of its gasoline from the tanks at the guard station, they set the place on fire as they leave, causing a massive explosion in an attempt to cripple Woodbury's gas supply. On the road back to the prison, Maggie has Glenn pull the convoy vehicle in front of the RV, stopping the others and saying that they should stop off at a nearby Walmart to grab whatever supplies they could on the way back. At the Walmart, they hurry to gather up as much as they can when suddenly Glenn says, "Oh shit," as he notices several armed Woodbury thugs approaching the store. Knowing that the men had seen their vehicles and were definitely going to find them, Glenn decides to risk his life to save Maggie's by attempting to casually walk out and talk to the men, acting like an innocent survivor group passing through. It's a dumb plan. They immediately recognize Glenn, and back in the store, Andrea trains her sniper rifle on them. The lead Woodbury resident shoots Glenn point blank in the chest, and Maggie screams out as Andrea shoots the man in the throat. Maggie runs out and cradles Glenn in her arms, with Michonne sneaking around a vehicle and slicing all but one of the Woodbury men to pieces, and Andrea is forced to kill the one survivor when he appears to be about to shoot her. Glenn wheezes that he can't breathe, and Maggie is overjoyed that he's even alive, with the riot suit having managed to protect him, though he does have a giant welt in the center of his chest, and a few cracked ribs. Glenn and the group make it back to the prison during a shitstorm of events, with Lori giving birth to Judith, Billy scrambling to get gas for the generator, and Dale getting bitten on the leg by a zombie. Several days later, Glenn walks in on Rick shaving off his beard, saying that he might as well go all the way and join him in being bald, but Rick says nope, he likes his hair. He asks Glenn how married life has been, and Glenn smiles and says that it's the best thing that ever happened to him. Rick pauses for a moment and says, give it time. The survivors have a brief period of downtime, with the threat of Woodbury still looming, but other than that, relative peace. Having gained enough supplies from the run, Glenn and the group went on to survive comfortably, and even have occasional power in the prison. Glenn and Maggie are both part of an advanced gun training trip outside the fences of the prison, headed by Andrea to get the better shooters in the group more accustomed to shooting moving targets. And when they return, Glenn goes to Rick and informs him that Alice, the de facto doctor of their group, had Andrea capture a zombie to chain up in the prison yard and examine, which leads to Carol feeding herself to it in an insane suicide. During this period of downtime, Maggie hints at Glenn that she wants to have a baby, having picked up a crib at the Walmart just in case. Initially, Glenn says he isn't sure, but then when Maggie says it again, he entirely caves, saying that her dad is going to kill him, but that he really wants to start a family with her too. After having sex, they walk around holding hands and smiling, with Maggie saying that she thinks she might already be pregnant. At that moment, with Tyrese and Michonne happily playing basketball, Dale learning to walk with his new leg, and Rick and Herschel eating newly grown tomatoes, Rick looks across the fence and sees the forces of Woodbury, an entire fleet mixed between military and normal vehicles, headed by a fucking tank, with the governor standing on top, dressed in riot gear with an eye patch and missing the arm that Michonne cut off. And with no further warning, he yells, "Kill them all!" Woodbury opens fire on the prison, sinking bullets into the zombies surrounding it, and narrowly missing the survivors inside as panic erupts. The governor takes out a megaphone and calls for a ceasefire, announcing to the group that if they open the outer gates and put all of their weapons, armor, even their knives outside of the inner gate and let Woodbury take it, they will allow the group to keep their lives. But when silence is his only reply, he commands to reopen fire before being hit in the armor by a shot from Andrea, who only missed his head because of the riot helmet Dale had made her wear. When Woodbury fires back at Andrea, a bullet grazes her skull and she temporarily stops shooting, and Glenn mans the other tower to help pick them off, though he does note that he's still not a particularly good shot and isn't that effective. Woodbury fires back at Glenn and shatters the tower windows, with Maggie yelling out for him as she's dragged out of the line of fire by Rick. Later in the skirmish, Maggie panics when she doesn't see Glenn in the tower, but then seeing more shots coming from his position puts a smile on her face. Glenn makes it through the first skirmish unharmed, and Woodbury leaves to conserve ammunition and make a better plan of attack, leaving the prison in relative disarray with Axel shot in the bicep, Andrea having a notch carved into her skull by a near miss, and Rick bleeding out from a gunshot in his stomach. When Dale and Andrea decide to take their adopted kids, Ben and Billy, along with Sophia when Lori refuses to leave Rick, and abandon the prison in favor of keeping their lives, Glenn and Maggie decide to go with them and leave the group, with the main reason being their desire to start a family, though Glenn does drive several cars into the prison gates to form a barrier of sorts for the people who are staying to fight to fire from. The governor assaults the prison again, and in the heat of battle, Andrea returns and tries to help. But when she fires at the governor from the top of the RV, he orders one of the Woodbury residents to drive a truck straight into it, knocking Andrea out of the battle and leaving Glenn and the others to an uncertain fate. The rest of the battle is a bloodbath, killing numerous survivors including Lori, baby Judith, Herschel, Axel, Billy, Patricia, Alice, and Tyrese, who was beheaded and executed as a show of force beforehand. You can get more of this battle by checking out the Tyrese and Axel character spotlights on the channel, and I will be doing more in-depth videos on the governor himself and the entire story arc this takes place in, so make sure to subscribe and check out those videos. After the remaining survivors have fled and the prison was overtaken by the remaining Woodbury residents, and more so overtaken by the zombies which now stream endlessly into the fences, following the Woodbury people inside as we hear their guns run out of ammo, Michonne surveys the bloody aftermath and comes across Dale's RV, with the Woodbury truck still rammed into the side and no one inside. She lowers her head in despair, but notices footprints leading away from the wreckage, and begins walking to find whatever allies she may still have alive. And that is where we're going to wrap up part 2 of my in-depth character spotlight on Glenn Reed. This video covered Glenn in the comics through issues 26 through 50, and Glenn is a central character at this time. The Governor and Woodbury really cement the brutality of the Walking Dead world, and set the precedent for major villains in the series, showing how truly horrible people could and would amass power through any means necessary in a world with no law and order. Glenn being psychologically tormented by the Governor through the horrific torture of Michonne is difficult to read, and Glenn seems very broken in those moments, though his marriage to Maggie and their lasting happiness even through hardship is a heartwarming note in a deadly tumultuous world. Glenn's journey does not end here, and we will be continuing on with part 3 and part 4, which will cover Glenn's story through the next 50 issues of the comics. So if you like this video or learned something new about the comics, please make sure to leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, and give the video a thumbs up so I can continue on making these videos. All of your support helps my videos grow and reach a bigger audience, which enables me to spend more time working on them and put out more great content in general. Also, if there are any Walking Dead character spotlights you want to see in particular, you can commission an episode by supporting us on Patreon. One of the patron rewards is to commission any episode of Comic History, including character spotlights, and this really goes a long way to supporting us and helping us keep the content coming. So if you'd like to do that, go check it out at patreon.com/rnsentertainment. Even if you don't commission an episode, donating even $1 a month would help us out. Let me know if you're excited for part 3, and if for some reason you haven't already, make sure to check out part 1. Go watch the other character spotlights I've done on Abraham, Tyrese, and Axel. Go check out the Comic History playlist where I've done other episodes on The Walking Dead Volume 1, and the Governor and Tyrese special one-shots. Again, this is Roman from RNS Entertainment, and Walking Dead Faithful, I will see you guys next time.